We'll call the meeting of the MRUSD, what are we, leadership, goals committee to order at 5:01 on September 1st. First order of business is agenda review. Any additions to the agenda? Okay. And we'll stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's see. Looks like we have no visitors in the room and no visitors online, so I think we can get right into old business. So item 5A, partnering with the Creative Discourse Group.
I thought maybe we could do introductions for Sue, and then
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so she knows who she's talking to in the room here. We all get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah. So let's go around, committee members, introduce yourself, and then maybe the municipality that you live in, or if you have students in the program in the school, or otherwise, like what drew you to joining this committee. Right?
Yeah.
I think that'd be good information. Anything else you'd like to know?
That's great. All right. Hi, my name is Joanna Jerose, and I am a school board member here. I have a daughter who's a freshman at BFA and a recent graduate. And I've been on the board, I think, for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I also work in education. I'm over at Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union.
Grant Henderson, we've met, but let's see, I live in the town. I have kids at the town school, and I wanted to be part of this because in talking with Bill, it seemed like there was a need for that, for this feedback from the board, going back all the way to more or less when Bill was hired. Identifying some ways in which we could make the curriculum move more smoothly and that sort of thing by having some roles. So facilitating that is what drew me to this group.
I'm Christy Marcus, and I teach at St. Albans City School in the alternative program, so a teacher within the district.
I'm Susan Kazanian. I'm on the school board and have been for 5 years or so. And all of our children graduated from BFA. I graduated from BFA, and we live in Fairfield now.
Okay, superintendent.
Demetrius Bolduc. I'm a parent of 3 children at the Fairfield Center School.
I'm Nakuma Palczewski. We live in the town, and I'm also a parent of a child at CTEC right now.
And then Ryer. Oh yeah, let's.
Ryer Erickson. I'm a school board member. I have a daughter who's in 5th grade and a son who's in 2nd grade at City School.
And then Aaron should introduce themselves to Sue.
I'm Aaron Smith. I'm the executive assistant to the superintendent, and I also take minutes for the board meetings. I have 3 kids in the school district.
I'm Erin Moshlow. I am the HR assistant. I live in the town. I have kids in the state as well.
And Aaron Rochelle helps us with a lot of our public engagement and helping organize all that. So I've told you, Sue, we have someone to help. Now you've met Aaron.
I think we'll be talking.
And Sue, I didn't go and look for, I thought about looking for a bio, but I said, I'll let Sue do her own introduction. But I've known Sue for several years in different ways through schools. And as you all, I've told all of you, Sue's works with a group with Creative Discourse Group, and they won the contract to help us with our equity work. And then since we saw some of the combination of this group and that work, it was like, hey, and this group has talked about partnering. So maybe Sue, just a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
Thank you. So it's so good to be with all of you. My name is Sue McCormick. My pronouns are she and her. I've lived in Vermont over 30 years. I know that means I'm still not, I haven't been here generations, but I raised 2 kids in the state who love Vermont and call it home. They don't live here right now, but they have deep roots here. I live with my wife in Essex Junction, and I've been doing civic engagement and racial equity work for decades, and I like to say that I used to do stealth equity work in Vermont many years ago, when people, racial equity wasn't quite on the minds of a lot of people yet, but people were starting to see that to really have strong local communities, they needed to hear from everyone. And leaders were starting to realize that sometimes that if they could share some power with other voices and other viewpoints, they could actually get some better outcomes. And as the world has changed, we've been able to be much more explicit about the work. I've co-founded a business called the Creative Discourse Group with Nadia DeBose. She's just a wonderful colleague, and she has a lot of experience working specifically with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. She spent many years in higher ed at Champlain College, and now is the co-founder with me. And we work with a bunch of really fantastic associates. We do a lot of work with school districts, municipalities, and organizations. Mostly in Vermont. We have some work in Maine. I originally started the first version of this business about 10 years ago because I wanted to do locally what I had been doing nationally with a group called Everyday Democracy. We went around the country and helped communities talk about racism, racial equity, school reform, downtown revitalization, pretty much any issue a community wanted to problem solve together, we would come in and just help them. So I really wanted to do the work closer to home. Nadia and I both believe that relationships are at the very heart of all of this work, and it's really hard to fly in and fly out and be in a real relationship with people. I didn't like that so much. So we're just very happy to be doing this work locally. And we also think that understanding the local context is super important. And so even coming from, Essex Junction up to St. Albans, right, there's a shift there that we'll work to understand. And so we like being kind of close into folks that we're working with. Is there anything else, Bill, that you want me to say about?
I think that's great introduction to the work you do. I would just say I've been an admirer of Sue's work for years. I think it was years ago I saw some of the work you did even before Essex, and you've worked with Essex and several other school districts, and helping not only look at racial and equity issues, but also looking at strategic plans, strategic goals, and doing community outreach. So you have a wealth. I've always seen you as a wealth of knowledge for that. So thank you for that.
So, as long as we have PEG here, I think that, the idea is we want to figure out kind of how we can partner, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if we have already a proposal in how that could look, or if we are kind of making that up tonight.
I think there's a proposal. I think Sue and I were talking,
Yeah.
and I asked Sue to put some things on paper, so they were put into the packet.
Yeah. Right.
And really to kind of look at a way of doing this work together,
Mhm.
and not overlapping and not stressing different communities within Maple Run. So, and then sharing the information. So I asked Sue to put together some pieces that
Yep.
she could probably talk to.
I think that's a good
Back.
idea. Do you have something that you'd like to start with, or should I just, pick the thing that I think is the beginning? Where do you want to go?
Why don't you say what you think is?
Okay, so if I look through here, there's the announcement that we have, and I think that announcement was for some of the work that you've been doing outside of this, right? That was for that we can look at and we can try to figure out if that's if the content and announcement, how it might pertain here, right? And then we have sort of the concept of the listening sessions, right? And that discussion guide, which I think would be good to review also. And am I right that you guys have already conducted some of those, or those are?
Nope, we haven't done, we're waiting to kind of.
Okay, so those are gonna happen.
We
after
wanted
this.
to coordinate everything. As soon as I
Okay.
talked to, was it about a week and a half ago?
So I think maybe Grant, those are the specifics, which is great. And some of those specifics build on some work that I think you all did at your last meeting. And so I think we definitely want to name that is how we kind of got to some of where we are.
Okay.
But I think maybe it would be helpful to just step back a little and talk maybe a little more broadly about what our kind of scope of work here is, and why we thought it would make sense to consider partnering with you all on what you're trying to do. So maybe that bigger picture background might be helpful,
Okay.
if that makes sense. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, we were really interested in this opportunity to work with the district, and we're just making a beginning, right? Like, this is our first time here, face to face, I think. And so our understanding is that last year there was an effort to have some community conversations around some of the equity issues facing the district, and for a variety of reasons those weren't able to happen. And so the district wanted to continue to work on bringing the community into this conversation, so they reached out to folks for some proposals, and we were really happy to respond. When we're talking about equity work, of course, you know, an institution like the school district or the municipality can't do it alone. It's work that goes beyond one sector of the community. And so we really liked this idea of having an opportunity to do some work in the district to help continue the district build its internal capacity for equity work. And so part of our work is going to be to lead some workshops with staff and to do some coaching with some of the school leaders and perhaps some teachers. I don't think we know exactly who we're going to be working with yet, just to give people support for this work. This work isn't easy, and so that's part of the approach. And then the other thing that we were asked to do was to help reconvene a series of community conversations. And because of the history, and because this was an effort that tried to happen last year and didn't, we really felt like it was important to start with some listening sessions. So instead of coming into the community and saying, okay, we know what you need to talk about, you know, let's go, we just wanted to come in and start with a very general conversation where we could hear from community members, students, staff, residents, people who hold marginalized identities, people who are the furthest from justice in your community, a little bit about their experiences living in this area, a little bit about their hopes for their students and the young people in the community, and some of their, you know, initial ideas about what the school district can do to continue to create equity for students. And so our plan was to hold about 7 of those conversations in the fall, convene a local group that would hopefully have some folks from this committee and some residents and some students on it, to take what we've heard and then hold some community conversations in the winter, so that they're really built around what the community says matters. So that's our plan. And so when we started talking to Bill about this plan, he said, you know, the goals committee is trying to also do some outreach to the community and, you know, get some community input to inform how you all talk about what matters most to the district. And one of the things that we're always really aware of is that you know, we're always trying to challenge people to work in ways that are more inclusive. And one of the things we all tend to do, because it's convenient, is to work in silos, right? And not kind of bring things together. It's always more work to collaborate. It's more efficient to work in those silos, but you know, there can be some unintended consequences that aren't so great. And one thing is, if one of the things that we really care about is hearing from community members who've been marginalized, we don't want to keep going to them in a bunch of different ways and asking maybe similar questions, right? And so we think it's respectful to do the work of kind of coordinating so that we're sharing information, bringing information back to all of you that you don't have to kind of go out to and try to get. So that was kind of the intention behind trying to coordinate. And maybe I'll just pause there and see if anybody has any questions so far.
Not a question, but what I would add to that is, you know, if I think about the process you described, like the listening sessions and then the forums, right? So just to draw attention to the fact that that is also what we were planning, right, through the thin and thick engagement, right? So we had this idea that we were going to have a thin engagement process with surveys and basically listening sessions, right? We were calling them that. And then to go back out and get more direct feedback through our thick engagement sessions, right? So that was, I think, one of the reasons that we decided to align, was the processes were so, you know, closely parallel. That was all.
And I think, just so you know, because you weren't in our last meeting, it was a pretty quick, this group went like, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it wasn't much of a discussion. I mean, I think it was, and people correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like, Grant, you and I kind of discussed our meeting with Sue and Nadia before, and this group after, it was maybe 2 minutes. And everyone's like, yeah, let's meet and talk about this. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's why you may not be getting a lot right now. It's just
Okay,
because.
that's fine. We identified it when we had, I can't remember which meeting it was, but you know, I know that I said, well, it sounds like they're looking for much of the same information that we're looking for. We're gonna, yeah, so I think we're all in agreement that
Awesome.
we're ready to go that way.
Okay, that sounds good. So I noticed you did some work coming up with some pretty specific questions about, you know, student success and things like that. And I'll just say that the listening sessions that we conceived of are, you know, it's broader than those specific questions, but certainly we're expecting to hear answers to some of those questions or the beginnings of answers to some of those questions. So we wanted to keep it just very open so that people can just tell us what's on their minds. And so we designed a discussion guide that's, you know, pretty open but has structure to it. And so what we'll be looking for is patterns across different groups, but then also places where maybe certain affinity groups have certain concerns that need to be addressed that might look a little different than the concerns of some other groups or the hopes of some other groups. So that's what we'll be looking for. One thing that we care a lot about is making sure when we invite people to do this kind of thing that they hear back. And so something that will be really important to us is, and we haven't talked yet about the mechanism, whether that will come from this group or from the district, but we'll want to make sure to stay in relationship with folks and make sure they're hearing back. Like, this is what we heard and here's the next step. So I just wanted to name that. So I don't think there's a need to kind of like walk specifically through the discussion guide unless people want to, or if you looked at it and you have any questions about it.
I'll say one of the things in connecting to the last meeting, 2 meetings ago when I ran you through a protocol from one of the protocols of looking at, you know, what do you want for kids to be successful, and when we looked at that protocol, I got feedback from this committee like that's too education specific, and so we brainstormed these questions, and then when you look at the protocol that you produced, Sue, I actually think that's even more accessible because of the generalities of the questions. And so if you look at some of the questions that are in there that are talked about, and for me, that even got us even closer to that more people could relate to those questions. I don't know what others think about that, but that's what I thought as I looked it over last week.
The general questions?
Yeah, if you look in the protocol
Okay.
that Sue wrote here, there's just some, even from the list that we put together, but what do you love about this place?
Yeah.
You know, that people can connect to that, right?
Yeah.
What's going well around here? What are some challenges that we're facing, right? Those are, and I,
So the only thing I'm gonna say is, tell us about the area, including Fairfield.
yeah. So yeah, that can be, and we can tell us about Maple Run or tell us about the Franklin County area.
Yeah, and that's really helpful feedback so that we
Yeah, it's good.
we can reword that to be
Yeah, and so like all those questions that you see from the part 2 discussion, I think those are, at least from mine, and this is because you gave me good feedback and just thinking like, wow, like I'm too much in my educator hat. How do we broaden this? And that even helped me kind of think of that even more. I don't know what others thought.
I think what we were talking about was that we were definitely more focused on the academic side of it, right? But clearly there's so many confounded barriers out there that lend to it. And then we were talking about how we have these different sectors of experts that we're going to lean on for support. And when we need to lean and learn more and receive guidance about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we would be, leaning on you. But yeah, all of these questions are important.
Yeah.
So, one thing I did notice with the discussion guide, I was hoping we could make the discussion of goals and, how's it put in here? Hopes for the future of the community's young people, right? I was hoping we could maybe make that a little more central, near the top of the introductory material. Like, this really starts off, as a framework for, it puts the belonging and equity really at the front, right? Which is good. But it's almost like the goal setting aspect of it it's not really an afterthought, but just the way it's presented down in section DI, right? Where it says, we also want to hear your hopes, right, for the future. I think that kind of maybe belongs up in why it matters.
All right.
So, there's the context aspect of this, right? Where you present this sort of as a feedback session, right? The why this matters, it provides the framework, under which we're discussing it, why the positioning it with the in the environment that followed the murder of George Floyd and the COVID pandemic, and how that feeds into the prioritizing of the equity and social justice, and then and then we go into like the community, the creation of the inclusive community part of it. So if we're partnering here, I think that I'd really like it to be emphasized that part of that inclusive community concept, that could apply to a lot of things. Like you mentioned several types of projects, right, where this framework really could be applied, right? You could take out goal setting for the school, and you could put in some other community building thing, right? So unless there's another like objective to this work, if it's just general feedback, on how we want to achieve belonging, inclusion, equity, that's fine. But I think that we also need to emphasize to people that we are really looking for feedback on goals for the school as well.
So why this matters, C, if you add in the number 4, I'm making this up right now.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, research shows that when the community is engaged in setting goals for their future, we have better outcomes. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, sure, but I mean, maybe even something so straightforward as, the school board and the administration are soliciting feedback on, goals for students in the Maple Run district, right? So, that's part of why the discussion matters, is because it's the forum to provide that feedback.
I like the direct.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I like being direct, because they need to know why we're talking to them, and not something, research, no, this is what our goal is with this information.
I like that.
The transparency aspect.
or, I mean, maybe that even belongs up in B2, right? The community to continue to make progress. Well, what is progress? What's the thing that we're trying to accomplish? And maybe it is more than just goals for the schools. Maybe there are other objectives. Maybe there are other.
I think we have different objectives, which is okay.
Yeah.
Because your work was supposed to happen at a different time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it just is happening on a different timeline, which is coinciding with the work that we're gearing up to do. So I don't know that, when I think about it, I guess I think about it kind of happening simultaneously, where we're doing our work, you're doing your work, and we could even just glean the information that you get from your work and weave that into our work. I don't know that it's,
Well, I
does
think
that not make sense?
For
I mean, that's
transparency
how I-
purposes, they should know what the information is used for. Like, they're thinking they're just talking about equity and diversity, and they need to know that we're also going to use what's being told, that they're using what they're saying for our goal purposes too, just for transparency purposes. So I think it'd be good to put in there somewhere that's also like you will also use information for X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely.
And like plan that out. And so I think whatever we're using this for, goals, for information or whatnot, like plan out, like bullet point those so people know that they're being used, their voices are being heard by many different places, not just one.
Great.
So maybe it's a question for Bill. Are there other, I don't know, maybe specific aims that are leading to the collection of the soliciting of the information?
Well, yes, I mean, there are, because research is really clear, and I'm gonna go to research first, and I like the directness that you're saying, the administration of the board, so I don't wanna go to research, but for me, I always come from grounded research, is when a community is involved in a public education system, and it's usually said the school, let me just say it that way, because that's where a lot of the research is done, it's now moving up into districts, that kids actually perform better. You know, when the community's behind the school, kids perform.
Absolutely.
You know, and so, you know, if we can, you know, that's how we started this, was how much buy-in was to that statement up there.
Yep.
You know, and so now you're asking that question, and that's what how the goals committee came about.
Yeah.
And to say, okay, so what is that? And so I think, you know, I don't think you have to state it in a bunch of places, but I like what was said about, let's be transparent how this information is gonna be used. So everyone, I didn't know it was just wanted to make you know that we're here having this discussion today, but we're gonna use it for this too. And I'm trying not to put a name on either the discussion or what it is purposely. I think it's good for people to know that. And as you said, Sue, it's that feedback of what did we hear and where are we using this and what are the next steps?
Yeah, this is great. Okay, this is really helpful. Just this is obvious, but these talking points are just things that a facilitator is going to say to the group, right? And so we want the facilitators to be able to have be transparent and have a similar message to everyone. Like, this is why we're here, folks. So I really like what you say about adding this specific thing in, like, here's the different ways we're going to use what we're hearing. Because there's several things that we're going to be doing.
Right.
Right. And so we can do that. I think for
But
this.
it's not taking the place of, I guess that's what I'm hearing from you, that you're kind of concerned that it's taking the place of our focus.
Yeah, or
That's what I'm hearing from you.
So
I think people care about the motivation.
Yeah.
You know, you want this information, why do you want this information, right?
Right.
And if it really is, like, you know, in the world that I work in, I'm a scientist, right? We have two kinds of science. We have your basic research, and then you have specific aims. And basic research we often call rogue science. It just means someone's really curious about something, and they go and they learn all about it, and when they're done, they're happy that they learned about it. We have specific aims, which means I have to achieve a goal, and I need this information to achieve that goal. And we should make it clear that this is both of those things, right?
Yeah.
We really want the information for the school district because it could be useful in many, many ways, and we know that it's going to be useful in this particular way.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful, and I'm happy to make adjustments to this, and we'll share that back with all of you. And then in terms of how this work is gonna intersect and whether you all are gonna do your own activities. I mean, I think if you can just kind of pause a little while we do these sessions, I think it will become more clear, depending on what we hear. And this is one of the things that's always a tension point when we work with communities, because if we're really sincere about learning from the community and leading where this goes, then we don't want to, we need to wait a little to start hearing where people are going before we know. For example, if we hear certain themes, then it might be just a fantastic fit for the conversations we're going to have next winter, for that to be something that is like, that's where you're going to get your information for your work. Or you might decide, you know, we want to do a survey about something really specific that we want to know more about, and that might be a separate thing, or it might be something where all the people that are involved in this process are also invited to take a survey. And so I think that, you know, having these conversations happen, looking at the themes will help you all decide, you know, does it work for us to have some people on our committee help with these community conversations in the spring, and that's the body of our work, that's where we're gonna get our information to make our recommendations around goals, or there's some things that you wanna do as a committee that are separate, that will, you know, be informed by that, but will maybe be a little more specific. And I don't think you have to know the answer to that yet, if that makes sense.
That, maybe the next place, if we're, I don't know how people are feeling about the discussion, that this was something we were gonna have to do anyway. And so, Sue, thank you so much, because that's like taking the work and not having to do it twice, so I really appreciate that. Maybe it's talking about, I don't know, where I'm wondering if if we go to this next place about the different groups to talk to.
So,
Because we did that brainstorm prioritization
right.
at the last meeting as well.
So this is where, again, we especially appreciate the work of this group, because, you know, it's really important to figure out who is it that we really need to talk to, and we do want to definitely center the voices of people who have been underestimated and left behind, because those voices are going to tell us the information that's most important for all of our purposes. And so what we did is we looked at the list. You all did a priority setting exercise, and we made some recommendations based on a couple of things, the priorities that you identified. We have in our work plan 7 groups, and what we wanted to suggest and talk with you about is we think that it might be useful to do a couple more groups than the groups that we had identified, and so we're wondering if there's people on this committee who would be willing to facilitate a few of these groups. And we would support you. We would provide the discussion guide, have a briefing meeting where we talk a little bit about just some tips for how to do this. We would encourage people who have some experience facilitating conversations that might step forward. So that's what we were thinking about. So before we talk through the groups, I wanted to see if that assumption was a safe assumption and how people feel about maybe having some folks from this group facilitate a couple of these conversations. So people are nodding. Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm gonna take the nodding as yes.
Okay, so that's great. So then the second thing is, you know, sometimes it's helpful to have an outside group who's thought of more as neutral to work with certain groups. And sometimes it's really helpful to have people with a community connection do this. And so again, as you know, the newcomers here, we made some calculations based on what made sense to us, but we really want to hear from all of you. I'm happy to make some adjustments here. So like, which of these groups do you think it would be most helpful for us to work with? Which groups do you think it would make sense for you all to work with? And one of the things that we've tried to do is create this so that there are affinity group opportunities for people. And these are opportunities that we want people to opt into. So we're not forcing someone, right? We're not calling someone and say, because you identify as, you know, a person of color, you need to be in this group. But we want to make that available to folks. And so to the best of our ability, We try to have associates that hold the same identities as the affinity groups be the facilitators, and that actually creates a really nice space. And it's very appreciated. I know in some communities we've done LGBTQ groups and I facilitate, and people are so happy when they know that I'm part of that community, you know. So we do try to offer that as much as we can. Okay, so we thought that the 7 groups that we could help with were a group of students, parents, staff, residents who identify as BIPOC, residents who identify as LGBTQ, the city's committee, their equity committee. And then we also thought an open group, so that if people just say, I don't want to be in an affinity group, I want to be in a mixed group, we would facilitate that. There were a couple of other groups. We wondered if there's somebody in this community who has a personal connection or is a person who identifies as Abenaki or as an indigenous person that might be interested in facilitating that group. We don't, as far as we know, we don't have associates with a personal connection to the Abenaki community up here, and so we thought that might be good if there's a local person that has that connection. A community partner group, so that some of the partners that you identified, child care providers, social service organizations, medical and health partners, we included a bunch of different groups that you had identified in this community partner group, and then a group of government officials, elected officials, and local leaders.
So is there a question in there?
So, one question is,
Is there somebody that?
does this make sense?
Yeah.
Let's start with the groups that we're looking for help facilitating. So groups 8, 9, and 10, a group of indigenous folks, community partners, and government officials. Does it make sense to you that folks from this committee or the local community would facilitate those 3 groups? Or is there any group there that you think it would really help if kind of an outside group served as a facilitator for any of those 3 groups?
Well, one thing that we talked about before is why we would be pulling out. I mean, on some level, I understand why to pull out, indigenous Abenaki, but when you BIPOC, right, the I is indigenous. So, could that not be?
So Sue and I had that conversation, and I've been on a couple committees. I'm on a committee right now for Franklin County, and have worked with a couple of leaders of the Abenaki, and they expressed in a meeting about how they feel like when they're included with a BIPOC group, they don't feel inclusion, and when they're included with and then they're included in a BIPOC community, this is here in Franklin County, that they don't feel like they're trusted as a member of that. And then when they're included within a white group, they don't feel like they're a member of that. And I heard that really loudly 2 meetings in a row.
Okay.
And so I was like, okay, maybe we need to do something different. And that Sue and I had that conversation. I didn't have it with all you. It happened since the last meeting.
Okay.
And I see Ryer has his hand up, so I want to make sure
Yeah, I think my question kind of runs along with Joanna's in that I am confused, and maybe we can talk about this at another spot, but I do think there's value in not just having, if we're talking about an affinity group, to not just lump BIPOC as an affinity group. That's not an affinity group. And so I did have a question about that, and I'm realizing we're kind of focused on that 8, 9, 10. So we can get to that maybe later, but I do have questions about that. So,
Ryer, could you share what do you think would make more sense?
well, it's hard. I mean, these groups would be very small if it wasn't BIPOC, but I do think perhaps in a setting like that, if you were to have a BIPOC group, you could maybe separate into like smaller groups, smaller like subgroups in that setting. So start as a group, kind of separate out, and then come together.
So an affinity space within the affinity group.
Sure. Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
I mean, I appreciate what Phil said, if that's what people are requesting.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I was
maybe we can move, to another
Yeah.
space at some point, but.
And it's with two people I worked with, and some of the people I was thinking about facilities I didn't get a chance to tell you was Jeff Benet, who works up at Missisquoi Valley. I was thinking about him helping us. He does a lot of the work for Missisquoi Valley, and I just haven't had a chance to talk with him. And there's another person I don't want to really say their name because I haven't had a chance to talk to them at all, but we know Jeff does that work. So
Yeah,
so
I have
Sam-
his name down too, and then somebody else's. But I was thinking
So I think it
maybe
really is very important to have a separate group for Indigenous people because they have taken the trouble to say that that's what they need,
Absolutely.
right? So, so that makes a lot of sense, and if you have some local folks that.
I just need to do the work, and I haven't done it since
Okay.
you and I talked last week, so
That sounds great.
it's on the
Sounds
to-do
great.
list.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about this list?
Back to Ryer's point about the
Yes.
BIPOC, if we're gonna go back up, I think it is important to separate them out because we do have a huge, especially in the Fairfax area, of migrant workers who have a completely different experience in the schools than people who are not migrant workers. So I think it is important. I actually am not a big fan of the term BIPOC because it groups a ton of, it's like the
Yeah.
other.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the other, within the other is so many subgroups. And so I think BIPOC is good as a general statement, but I think within there needs to be affinity groups because not everybody experiences the world the same way.
Yes, absolutely. So, given.
But it's hard here because there's not many of us.
Right, right. So we might.
But it is culturally specific to this area.
Yeah, it is culturally
Right.
specific to the
So-
area.
So what would you,
Absolutely.
if we broke out that, and also a lot of times now, we talk about people of the global majority, right? And so all of these labels keep changing and none of them are great, right? But if you think about this community, what would you say would be the kind of groupings of people of the global majority that would make sense? We've identified Indigenous, Abenaki, migrant workers.
I think for sure the migrants should have
Yeah.
their own
Okay.
situation because I think
Okay.
they have a different experience.
Yeah.
I don't know how, a lot of migrant kids, at least in the South, they travel often, and I don't know how often, how like gypsy these kids are, and you may have families that are gypsy and not, depending on the work. So I think they're a very important group just to have on their own. And I think everybody else, I think it's different, because my experience as a Mexican there is so many different in the world. So it's really hard because there's so many subgroups within the BIPOC community.
Yeah.
But I think they're one group that we should really focus on because they have a very different experience of America than we do.
Yeah, okay, great. And other subgroups within that you think, given this area, that would be important to?
Do we have a huge migrant immigrant
So,
community here like we do in
We
like,
don't
like,
right
in the
now.
West
I'm just gonna go off the student demographics, which we're actually getting ready to give to the board next week with this new year. We only have a couple kids that are migrant workers. Our largest historically marginalized group is Native American,
Mhm.
Indigenous folks. We're about 86% white, and then I think after the Indigenous, which is our largest, it then goes, I'm sorry, I should have brought these with me, but I know we have quite a few Asians, we have a few Pacific Islanders, I'm just looking at the student body, and African Americans and mixed racials actually are our next largest after Indigenous. So.
That's the hard part about not grouping us all together in such a rural area.
Right,
Is
it's
that,
hard.
we don't have different
and I like
experiences,
what-
but
I
there's
like
not
what-
enough of us to actually like,
Yeah.
oh.
I really respect what Ryer said. It's going to get small fast, but how do you? There's
Yeah.
different experiences for everybody.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if it's a small enough group, the experiences can be vocalized in a larger setting. If there's not like 50 people there and there's only 10 people, the conversation will probably be more intimate.
What, I'm curious if you, Ryer, since you brought this up, have thoughts about, so the idea is to do these focus listening sessions could be like 8 to 15 or 16 people, right? We could do some interviews instead of doing like a BIPOC listening session, we could do a series of briefer, one-to-one interviews with individuals. So what you gain there is you're not lumping people together, what you lose is people don't get to hear from each other, and that can change the conversation sometimes in ways that it's not that helpful. But I just wondered if you had any thoughts about doing kind of maybe one-to-one interviews rather than bringing people together for a session.
Yeah, I mean, I do think interviews are interesting. I've been a part of a number of like BIPOC affinity groups, and I have found them helpful. And I have found actually I've learned a lot. I mean, I've learned stuff while I'm in them, and so I think interviews are helpful. I also think you'll probably run into. I mean, there's a lot of cross. So like, you know, I'm Black. I'm also on the city BEI committee. I'm in this group. Like there'll be a lot of kind of cross contamination. I don't want to use contamination, but a lot of cross maybe pollination would be a better way to put it. A lot of cross pollination between them. So I do think interviews are helpful, but I also think I do think it is. I guess it is important to have a BIPOC affinity group. I mean, I think it's important to invite people there and just be clear that, you know, this is a group with many different identities, and those identities have different experiences, and it's important for everyone to be respectful of that.
Yes.
I'm sure you know, I don't need to probably tell you that. I'm sure you already know that, as this is your work, but I just think I think sometimes in this work, that kind of thing can get lost, and especially because I think people seem to think like racism is the same for everyone, no matter what your racial identity is, and it manifests itself in very different ways, depending on, you know, what your racial background is. Asian people oftentimes are way over. They're like it's like almost like a reverse racism where they're complimented and given all this credit for things and all this other stuff. And in reality, it's no different than, you know, the kind of sexism sometimes that women experience, where they're given a lot of credit for things when it's women are people, you know, Asian people are people, and it's a kind of a hard thing to manage. So I would say, yeah, I understand the reasoning why we have a BIPOC group, and I think it's important to have it. But I would wonder if there is a way, like you said, interviews or something, to make sure that we're getting information from people when they don't necessarily feel safe doing it in a larger group.
I really appreciate that, and we have a great facilitator for that group. That I love your reminder though, Ryer, about just setting that up by, you know, acknowledging just the wide range of experience people bring and hold. And it makes me think of some work we did in Essex, where I do think there's power in having a group, even though there's some trade-offs. And I know in the Essex Westward School District, we held some listening sessions. Actually, these were municipal listening sessions around safety and policing. And we pulled together a BIPOC group that was very diverse. And that group became a powerful group with a lot of solidarity. And actually, we invited some members of that group to weigh in on the district's equity policy. And they actually said, we don't want to weigh in, we want to write it. And so the school district, to their credit, made a facilitator from our group and space available, and a group of BIPOC students, community members, and teachers wrote the district's equity policy and submitted it to the equity committee. And that was a very powerful, unexpected outcome that happened. And so that's one of the things that affinity group work can create, is some solidarity and some new relationships and connections that can be really powerful. So, yeah.
And I just wanted to add two things. One was that what you said a couple of minutes ago made me think that we also have some Latino families here who don't relate or align themselves with being migrant farm workers, right? And so that's also important, to allow people to go where they feel most connected, right? And then secondly, you asked if there were other affinity groups, and one thing that we haven't put on there is religious differences as well. And I would say that it's in there. Okay. I know we talked about utilizing religious groups, but in terms of grouping people, the faith community, using them as a resource. But in terms of over on this side, the groups of people that we would go to, I think that there's a fairly large Jehovah Witness population in Franklin County, and I think that that's something that is overlooked sometimes, oftentimes, especially in education. It's at being an educator, it's definitely something that we are faced with,
Yeah.
right? Quite often.
I wonder about, I mean, I think it could be possible to do a group if you all, it's also your bandwidth too, right? A faith community group. I don't know, I mean, this is where I have to lean on Bill, right?
Yeah.
Because there's things happening there that, I don't know if it would work to create an affinity space for one religious group, but an affinity
yes.
space for faith, people connected to a faith community could be a.
I just think that it's a group of people who definitely don't, I wonder about their sense of belonging in terms of education practices. So I was just trying to
So
be inclusive.
we're kind of getting into the same situation that we just talked about with BIPOC, right? Where we have some groups, I guess. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We just have to figure out where to include people. When we sort of promote this, we have these 10 or so sessions probably, right? One way to do it might be just to say, we're having these 10 sessions, and this is where they're focused. Come to the one that kind of speaks to you.
Yes, I like that, Grant, and that's exactly our recommendation,
Right. Okay.
is having people self-select.
Yeah.
So, people who identify as any of these groups, they may say, I just want to be in a mixed group and talk to a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
Or they may say, for me to really say what's on my mind, I want to be in an affinity space with this group that I am a part of. And so it's real, we think it's important for people to self-select,
Yeah.
so we're not making anybody
Yeah.
be a part of a group that they,
To make that kind of prominent, to say, this is kind of how we envision, this is how we set it up,
Yeah.
but if you feel
I
that
don't think
you're-
I sent you all the announcement piece, but there's
Yeah.
definitely an email that, in the email piece that, in the general announcement it was at, and then look, there was an email that's definitely gonna go out. And maybe I did include that in what came to all of you, but really about that self-selection. It's a self-selection, and that, Sue, you said it to me, it's on this, that having that opening group is just really important, and people can just say, that's where I wanna come. I think, when I think about the faith groups, I think it's important for invitations to go out to our faith leaders and say, we'd like you to come.
Yes.
It's always been really tricky for me with that line of, and our faith leaders are community leaders, but then how do you do that with not having? Do you need to have certain denominations, groups, or not, and all that? And
I was just trying to add.
yeah, no, I
to
think you were. I
the,
truly took
the
it.
makeup of our community,
Right.
and I just think that it might feel uncomfortable to say it out loud, but I think that I think they're an affected group, and that's a part of our community. And I would say that I have more Jehovah Witnesses at my school and within my SU than I do of some of the other populations that we're even talking about. And so I just don't think it's I am not saying that we have to delineate different religions. I just think that it is an area, if we're really looking at our community, right, fabric of our community, that deserves a little bit of attention, and that we as educators really need to look at, because I'm sure you can think of it, right?
Sure.
Christmas, birthdays, all these things that are in these young kids' faces every single day that really do affect them. And so I just think that it's a larger, the population is growing.
I'm so happy that you're bringing that up, because whether aside from the listening sessions, it takes a lot of creative thought to create equity, And so there just sounds like there's an amazing opportunity there to think about, like, how do you accommodate that population of humans so that they really feel included and welcome and a sense of belonging while, you know, making it so that other kids are also like benefiting from whatever shifts that you might make to kind of make the tent bigger. So that's a great problem to be working with. And I think what you're saying also, it makes me think of something else. So this announcement's going to go out, an email's going to go out. Hopefully all of you will come up with some individual people that you think should get an email. But people won't come because of an email. They're going to come because they get a text or phone call or personal invitation saying, hey, you know, we'd really love to hear your voice, it's important. And so, for example, if you feel like that's a community of people that haven't had their voice heard, you might want to say, hey, there's going to be a group of parents, you know, they're going to come and talk about how they're, you know, how they experience the community and the schools, and to just make sure that those voices are in the mix.
I would also add that I think there's a growing number of staff within our district that are also experiencing the same faith-based, like, there's a new staff member in my classroom who was sharing her faith, and I was like, just so you know, in our district we don't celebrate holidays, and she's like, that's fine, I don't celebrate holidays anyway. So I think it's more prevalent than we as a larger population know. So I do agree that it's good to give them the space as well.
And how many children are in schools?
Right now, I can only think of 3.
No. Because there's when we talk about the community, there's a much bigger population of migrant workers.
That's right.
In the community.
That's right. And I always wonder, when I think about the population of migrant workers I know we have within our 3 municipalities, I'm like, do we really have all the migrant children? And that my training tells me we don't.
We might not. I know historically, in California, that was one of the biggest issues they had was kids did not go to school because of many issues, and one was the transient nature of it. They actually would get in trouble because the kid only went to school and they would move for 2 weeks and they'd miss so many days that the kids' parents found it easier to keep the kids home than bring attention to themselves.
Right.
And so I assumed we had a bigger, because of the
No, it's a good.
rural areas.
We did have a larger population, but a couple of years ago, there was, you know, some.
Yeah, and also a lot of people now, at least I've heard, their families stay in one place and one parent is the one that travels and does the work, and the families stay in a safer location because of everything.
I do think right now it's also just more in the Missisquoi Valley district, you know, just we all, like you said, transient, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, a lot of these populations have a lot of other issues besides education and this, and that's one thing that you guys come in, is wonderful, that we're hearing all sides, not just the educational aspect of it, but like the world aspect of what they're dealing with.
Right, because this may surface some things that aren't that directly related to education that are really important to those families that the community should know about, right, and the school district should know about. So I think that it sounds like that could be a really important group, and so, you know, if you're a person who has a connection with those families, or, you know, is willing to facilitate, and also just making sure interpretation is available, if that would be a support.
I'm
that's
thinking like the
needed,
translators.
I can get translators.
Yeah.
I have friends who speak Spanish.
Okay, great. So I think that sounds like a really important to reach out to and talk with.
Yeah. No, we need some support there.
Yes, you've got somebody right in St. Albans who can do that.
Yeah.
Lives right next to the school.
So it sounds like we have general consensus on the group breakdown and composition. Maybe with a couple tweaks here and there, or different ways of emphasizing things when we do this announcement. We talked a little bit about the announcement. I didn't see anything in there that was super problematic. other than it, it's not really actionable. Like it,
Yeah.
There'll have to be something else that tells you how to actually do it, right? It's more of a notification. Like release thing.
And then there's below the announcement, there was a little email invitation that was a little more
Yeah.
actionable.
And so
But-
how's that? And so what's the logistics around you receive an announcement versus if you receive an invitation? Like what's the?
This is, Bill, I
Right.
think, first of all, this is just a suggestion,
Right.
so you can revise this. But my understanding was you wanted to make an announcement.
I wanna make an
Just so the
announcement.
community knows this is happening,
Correct.
and then the email is going to go to specific people that you
Right.
gather names that you send
I
to
want
individuals.
to make an announcement, so everyone's invited. And I agree totally with what Sue said. The announcement's gonna go out, it's not gonna go to tennis people. I wanna make it next week. And then at the board meeting, I was gonna list the help of all the board members. Just as Sue said, we would list all of you to say, who are a few people like, we need an email to go to. And we'll have the email. I was gonna put that out to parents as well, because we can do the parent list, that's an easy one. But also saying, all right, as you saw in here, some of the groups, and I talked to Ryer a little bit about this in a passing conversation, but just thinking about the city's Belonging, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, how can we have them together but not be in a committee meeting, so it's not a public meeting? Because that's the reason we're trying to do these, because it's easier to have the conversations when it's not on the public record to really get to what people are thinking and feeling. And so how do we get those invitations out? And so, and for some of the staff, I know some, for their staff that has expressed a lot to me about equity, but also goals for the school district. And those would be ones I would personally email, like, hey, or just going up to them and saying, I know that this is of interest to you. Erica's not here tonight, but I'm sure, I'd lean on Kristen and Erica and a few other staff leaders to say, hey, who should we really be pointing to come to this? And then the other piece of this, I think it was in the announcement, but Sue, you and I have had this as an honorarium. We're able to support up to 100 people with a $50 honorarium. That helps get people there as well. And to come and give 2 hours of your time. And so I know you've done that in other places. You and I had that conversation a week ago. I just didn't get back to you about that. We're able to make that happen.
That threw me a little bit, seeing that in there, for what it's worth. I don't know if it caught anyone else off guard.
I understand where it comes from, but as like a parent, just like, it's just a weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just feels like balked type
Yeah.
thing, like,
Yeah.
like it's. I don't. If I was just receiving it from a random email that wasn't something I recognized, I wouldn't think it was a true email.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, like
You know what I mean?
It makes it feel a little
Phishing
scammy,
attempt.
right?
Yeah, and I just think people aren't used to that interaction with
Yeah.
school districts, and I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I just don't think we're used to those interactions. So I'm not sure how people are gonna take that.
We can add something to that if people don't want to receive the stipend, they can opt out.
Yeah.
But the intention of that is, over the years, a lot of people in Vermont, Black people especially, have just given a lot of time and labor for free. And there's really a movement to stop that.
No, and I
You know?
understand the intention on it, and I think it's a great thing to do.
But as a parent, you were
But,
like,
but as
no,
a parent,
wait
if
minute.
you read that, it's different coming, because they don't understand the intention why we're doing this group and how important it is, and that's why it shows importance by giving them money.
Yeah.
But it's just a weird, when you're used to just getting emails from, school, like, hey, fill out this survey for free. And it's just a different interaction,
Yeah.
and people may have questions on it.
Yeah.
I think that's a grand thing. People are just gonna be like, why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a suggestion about?
I also think of some of the families at city school, the lower income families, that this might be a
Yeah.
big incentive for them to come out and share.
That's the other reason that we really like to offer stipends, because, oftentimes kind of middle class people that maybe hold a single job, are more likely to just say, oh, cool, I'll come and do this. And, we really want to try to hear from folks whose voices aren't often heard. And so this is attractive to some folks because it's like, wow, I could use the $50, then that's great. We would
Right.
really love to hear their voices.
I think it's a wonderful idea, I just don't know how people are gonna interpret it, don't they?
Yeah.
Sure. What happens if you have more people than you do $50?
Here's my question.
Just-
Like, part of me feels like that ought to be kind of
Cautionary.
clarified, that
yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
people don't get $50 just because they filled out the form.
Oh, no, you have to be
You
there.
have to, you have to
You better
participate.
participate.
Yeah.
You have to participate. And that's the place where the 100, for my place, I was like, because it took a little bit to get me onto this one. And I understood all the reasons that Sue just expressed.
Sure.
It was, okay, I'm actually, one of my roles as a superintendent is overseeing the business functions of the district. And this is one that doesn't pass our auditors real well.
Yeah.
And Martha said that to me. She's like, this is not gonna be good with the auditors, but if you make the call, you make the call.
What about dinner?
So, well, we were thinking light snacks as well. And so that piece of when you get over 100, when I thought about the announcement literally today, when I was out and had some time to myself, I was like, I think it's gonna be for the first 100 that sign up for this work. And
So that should probably be clear in
Yeah.
here.
yeah, we have, no,
That
Sue doesn't
there's-
know that. That's
Okay.
something that came in about 3 o'clock this
Yeah.
afternoon when I had an hour to myself.
Yep.
And
Do you
think
think
time.
it would still be as enticing if we cut it in half?
You know, that's for you all to decide.
Yeah.
That's a very
Yeah.
kind of.
I would take all
community
our
specific.
feedback from this group too.
I think
So
that
I
we
don't
have,
wanna be-
you get more participants, you say the first 200, I don't expect, I would love the 200 people
Right.
to participate, but I don't know if 200 people will, but if you say for the first 200, people don't realize what number they are, and you'll probably get the 200 filled than 100,
Yeah, I mean,
because people.
I'm all for incentivizing.
Yeah.
Like, $50 cash felt weird. A gift card feels less weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Something that's like, I don't know, but that's.
Well, the cash is what Sue had suggested to me.
Yeah.
I was still thinking about downtown bucks and things like that, but
Right?
yeah.
I don't know.
Walmart gift card, everybody should,
Like,
or
right.
Hannaford would be great
Hannaford's-
too.
Yeah.
Hannaford,
Yeah.
I think
Hannaford.
Hannaford would be
Yeah.
really,
Yep, and whatever you all decide is like a good fit for your community, I think is good. I think we
And I'm gonna
should,
take suggestion. I really want some not direction, but
An optional, equivalent donation to food shelf in
yeah.
your name, something.
Yes.
There's like a lot of different ways of doing
that, I know some places have run into trouble
this.
with
Okay.
that.
Yeah, okay.
Because that,
Yeah, we
I
can't
just
donate
can't- I
it
don't
Oh, yeah, you
think
can't
we can-
donate
as
from
a school
but
district.
I think we can add a sentence saying, if you don't wish to receive the stipend, you can opt out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so one of the equity things we do is we try to have it be an opt-out
Yeah.
instead of an opt-in, so people
Sure.
don't have to jump through hoops to get it.
Okay.
And so, if you all think a Walmart gift card makes sense, I think if you get 100 people, that's gonna be amazing and wonderful. I think that's a great goal for this first round of conversations. So, and if you think that, if you think about the folks who maybe have lower incomes, who would really love to hear their voices, like I would think about would $50 or $25 be the incentive that would make them think, I really wanna do this. So again, that's all your community can figure out those details.
I also think, about if it's like at night, in the evening, something like that,
Childcare.
is childcare.
I was gonna bring that up, like, is there anyone who can provide childcare?
Is there,
And that's what I was thinking, maybe we can have some, I don't know, staff, employees or high school students that are willing to volunteer.
Yeah.
I would even,
Oh, right. Sorry, Ryer. I didn't look up on the screen. Go ahead.
Okay, I can say like, I do this a lot and honorariums are pretty common. Like I get honorariums a lot for the work I do. Generally I just donate it. I like take the money and then I donate the money I have to usually like Spectrum or something. So it's not like, this is like pretty common stuff when you're soliciting opinions from people who aren't traditionally listened to. It's not just about incentivizing. I mean, it's not really incentivizing at all. It's really about paying people for their time, paying people for the time that they put in to informing us and giving us their experience, and it's an experience that's hard oftentimes to share. So I think it's better for us to not think of this as incentivizing people and more about paying people for the work they're willing to do for us, because it's not, when we start talking about incentivizing, it's like, it's a little bit infantilizing. I think it's a little bit about like, oh, here's a cookie for the work. Like I just want us to be careful about that. And I think it's important that we're cognizant of the way that might sound to some people, but it is very common. And I do think instead of like gift cards or any of that stuff, I mean, I think just if we do, usually I get mine and it's just a cash card, and it has whatever, usually it's like $50, sometimes $100, and it's just a cash card, and I just take that and then I donate money to whatever. But I do want us to be careful about the way we talk about it, because it's like an honorarium, right? It's about honoring someone and the work they're willing to give us. So I just wanted to.
So is the,
And Franklin County is not, Franklin County, some members of Franklin County, especially in the ag community, farmers get honorariums to go to stuff like, for water cleanups and waste management and whatnot, so.
Ryer, is the wording in the letter, we're offering a $50 stipend, calling a stipend to participants as a way to thank you for sharing your time and perspective with us? Is that typical wording, or is it, because when I hear thank you, that makes me more like, this is incentivizing.
No, I mean, I think it's about, I mean, I've usually seen it as a way of, I've seen it usually spelled out as a way to thank people, or a way to, the word's slipping me now.
Briar, I've seen honoring your time.
Yeah, honoring your time,
Okay.
or
Honoring
in
your time.
appreciation of your time, your commitment, your whatever. Yeah.
Briar, I just want to thank you for what you just said, because that's super important. And, we sometimes, depending on the setting, we acknowledge that, for some people who have had really terrible experiences with municipalities and officials, inviting them to come and share, sometimes about things that have been really difficult, there's an emotional cost to that. There's like emotional labor involved in that we want to honor and recognize. So I really appreciate that framing.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate here a little bit. Like, I feel like the work what we're doing, is we're going on the offensive. Like, we really want to gather as much information as we can to do everything possible to make this a great school district. The defensive part of me says, we need to be ready for the questions about where does this money come from, and why are we paying people to do this? And I mean, I think we just need to be, the taxpayers spending all sorts of money on education. Why are you spending money on this too? I just think we need to be ready for that.
That's a great point.
For me, it's we want to make sure that for me, with the equity work and the goals, we want to make sure that we have a broad base of the community that has a voice, and to encourage that voice, and with groups, and I am still learning how to say this correctly, so excuse me if I flounder here for a bit, but for groups that have been historically marginalized, their voice has not always been honored. And we need to show that we're honoring that and encourage them to come to a safe place. And this is a way we can do it. And if someone really got down to the money about it, the percentage of this that is part of it
Right,
is so
compared to the-
minor compared to the 64
entire-
million.
Budget.
And it's going back to our community.
Right. No,
It's
I
not
just
going
I-
to-
No,
I
I think
agree.
you're asking the right question.
I think
Make
we're
sure prepared.
I think that we need to be ready for
This
these.
conversation will pop up somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. No, I appreciate what you're
Yeah.
saying. I'm not trying to be dismissive. But I think you have to be able to answer that
I
question.
That's a great
think,
point.
But it's going back to us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Going back to people
Yeah.
who are
Yeah.
putting the time and effort into.
But that's not the justification is that it's well deserved
Yeah.
for the time you're
Absolutely.
spending.
Right.
And
Um,
so, right, what Ryer said is a great
Yeah.
kind of way to talk about it. And then also another way to talk about it is when we're doing equity, or one of the things we're trying to do is remove barriers. So, if you do need childcare
Yeah.
or whatever, there may be a bunch of barriers that make it hard to participate. If you
Yeah.
need to, go to work an hour late one evening, having that honoraria is potentially helping to remove a barrier. So that's another
Because you
way to
could
talk.
level all the same criticism against like the stipend that we receive as school board members.
I was just gonna
Right.
say, I would love to
Yeah.
see two. I would love to see a nighttime one, and I would love to see a daytime one. That would just be, I think there's seniors who don't prefer to go out at night. I think that there are people who are not working and their kids are at school during the day, and it's easier for them to come and go then. And I would just, that would be something I would advocate for, if there were multiple sessions, to try to have them at different times of the day.
Because for, again, on the same line, for a lot of people, it's nice to say, if I ask for an hour off, that means, Susan, you can have that day off. So they don't allow just an hour off. If you want an hour to go to an appointment, you get the day off. So, anyways.
So two things. One, I think practicing the conversation is really important. When school districts and municipalities get into equity work, there's always a backlash 100%, always. And so just getting comfortable and asking those questions are super important, and just practicing talking about this in a way that you feel is comfortable and real, so that you can answer those questions is important. In terms of the logistics, I did have a question that gets to the scheduling of a time frame. So, we have several of our associates that are going to help with these. And I just wanted to get a sense of what you all think is realistic to pull together, like a list of names to receive an email and then do some outreach. I know people, Bill and the district are gonna help, and hopefully the full board, so that we could kind of talk about a time frame. And then what I can do is find availability among our team, and then we can do like a little Google form where people can check times that would work for them, and we can find the time that works for the most people.
That sounds like a lot of logistics work, but that's,
It's,
Think if each board member can think of 10 people to invite,
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
it adds up quick.
and committee member.
And committee members, excuse me.
Everyone get involved, yeah.
Well, and I think it's easy too for Erica and I being in one of the schools too. It's
Yeah.
easy, we can send it out to colleagues and parents.
Okay.
So we had talked initially, we were trying to get to the second half of September for
Yeah.
sessions, and I think that might be a little aggressive, but we're gonna try to keep going there. I'm gonna talk to the leadership team. I don't know if it's gonna make Tuesday's agenda, just because I know what's on that agenda right now. At least it's gonna be a quick announcement to them and some emails. I'll be saying something at the board meeting. We're trying to get the announcement out next week. The announcements definitely go out, and invitation to parents. I haven't had a chance to work with Aaron and Sue to really kind of get some of the logistics of the Google form that you started this weekend to put together. So we have to figure that out. I think that realistically we would probably start listening sessions. We'll be in a good place if we can start the last week in September.
okay. So I'm gonna look for availability on my team from like the last week of September through the month of October. And we'll hope we can
Yeah.
find some times that work for folks.
And I would suggest for this group that we let the creative discourse group, and Sue, I don't want to impact the integrity of the affinity groups at all, but if there were people here that had a way of joining, at least, there's a mixed group, so they could be there, but to watch the facilitation and then be trained in the facilitation, that wanted to help with the other groups that we're doing might be a really good way to do it.
That would be great. And we're happy to offer like a 1-hour Zoom call for anybody who's gonna facilitate. We'll just talk a little bit about some facilitation basics. It's not a training, but a briefing, I would say, and just go over the agenda and then some note taking.
And what I would do is, you know, especially when I think about the government group and the community partners, those are ones that I can reach out to really quickly and get them. The one group that's not on here that we never listed in our brainstorm was a business group, and I know I've already talked to business leaders. Tim Smith is willing to help partner with us with the Franklin County Development.
I think that
Council.
says trade representatives.
Trade, yeah,
business
okay.
leaders.
Okay.
So
It's
we
in the
put
community
that,
partners.
into the community partners.
The community partners, okay. So,
And again, these can be further disaggregated depending on your capacity.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I didn't wanna come in here with a list of
Okay.
20 groups for you all to facilitate.
but
so.
I think if we can get some learning from the work that Sue and her colleagues are doing, and then say, okay, how does that impact us? We could come back together as a goals group. And as you said, learn a little bit from what's coming in before we start saying, hey, these are the groups we want to add.
So, Bill, in order to put out that announcement
Yep.
next week, you said,
Yeah.
right? You know, we talked about the groups. I think we were in general consensus that what was here was okay.
Yeah.
Do you need additional feedback on
I
this?
don't. I'm
No?
pretty
Okay.
much ready unless anyone saw something critical. You gave some feedback.
Okay.
Sue and I will work together. I'm going to check with Sue after this meeting just about our availability
Okay.
and really get something out next week as a general. And then I think it may be the end of next week, the beginning of the week of 2 weeks away, which I'd have to look at a calendar to really start the specific email campaign
Yep.
and gathering, you know, who are those folks and how are they going out?
So I'm just sort of kind of rolling through the things that we've sort of finalized tonight, right?
Yeah.
We're good with the groups. The announcement, right? We're kind of at that speak now or forever hold your peace moment, right, for these things. Was there anything about the announcement that we said we needed to tailor, right? There was
I will
maybe,
make a couple of adjustments
Yeah.
based on what I heard, and then you all can finalize that.
okay. So because there's now one more round of feedback there,
Well, I think what I would suggest, I'm actually gonna alter Sue's suggestion, if
So-
this group's good, that
so we're in.
Sue makes some adjustments.
Yes.
We'll look at it together, I'll send it out to you via
Yep.
email, if you have a question about it,
Okay.
or a statement, or like, hey, what about this?
Good.
Get back to me.
So is everybody
I gotta
comfortable
go
with that
next week
workflow?
with
You're
this.
gonna receive this thing, if I know Bill, you'll have it in your inbox for about 4 hours before it goes out to everybody.
He's gotta wait for Sue to do it.
Okay? So by the time you receive it from Bill, there's gonna be a limited amount of time to provide feedback on it.
I think
Okay.
what I'm gonna try to do is, and I've learned my lesson from doing that, is that probably I'll say something Wednesday night at the board meeting, and
Okay.
Thursday the announcement will be going
Okay.
out, but I'm hoping we can get something to you before
Okay.
then. I'm seeing a nod on Sue, so.
Alright. And I
We can
assume
give
the
you-
same workflow then for the email invitation?
Yeah, the email invitation, unless you see something glaring there, I'm
Okay.
gonna rely on the experience of Sue and her colleagues.
Okay, and will all those emails go directly to their recipients from you personally, or will they be?
No, I think it's better if like, if you know someone, Grant,
Yeah, so we'll forward them along.
yeah, you can forward it along.
But
Okay.
should we
Give you a
not
template.
send our lists to one person first? Because
So they-
I
we're
could be
gonna-
thinking
we're-
of somebody
right.
that
So-
Sue's
So we're
thinking
not-
the same person, and then they get 3
That's fine.
invitations.
Apologies if you receive.
Well,
like-
it's not fine if we're looking to try to gain 100 people,
For
right?
sure.
So we don't wanna be, it's a small community, we don't wanna be thinking all about the same folks, we wanna make sure that we're getting a good, you know.
Would the Google Doc notice if there's more, if the person signed up over more than once?
Yeah, we would just have to look through it.
I know there's open meeting law challenges
Yeah,
that you have to be aware of. So I know in some school districts, they wanted to do just a collaborative Google Doc where everyone just
Yeah.
put the emails in.
Yeah.
But there's privacy issues around that, so,
Yep.
so that could be a little.
Yeah, that's why I meant if we sent our list to Bill, then he would know whether or not, or someone, it
Right.
could be me, Grant, you know, I
Yeah.
don't mean to give you the work. Just the names is all that I'm saying, so.
It's
Or
probably
maybe
not
we'll
bad.
just come up with, we'll just come up with a couple of backups.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea to send the names in if you wanna do that. I also, and we can collate that in one place. But I also don't see the problem if people get a couple of invitations from
okay.
different people either,
Yeah, I just was
so.
talking about
can I ask a question about the list? Like when we're forming these lists, is there a plan to deal with people who belong to like multiple groups? And when it comes to, for instance, like the BIPOC group, as I think Bill mentioned, like there's a large mixed race population in our district. How do we, how are you planning on navigating the issue of like a child who might be Black, but a parent, or adoption is the same thing, right? So a child who might be Black or BIPOC in some way, and a parent or parents who aren't.
So I think we're going to, if it works, just have a very brief Google form where people can self-identify, and then that's how we would know what groups that people might be interested in.
Yeah, we're not trying to pin anyone into a certain group. We want them to do that, self-identification. So, and that Google form that you had that on there. And that also kind of tells us about group size and composition, and if we need to adjust as well, or if we need to try to invite others.
So is everyone's good with those workflows?
Okay, so it sounded
I
like
think.
it won't be a problem, Bill, if individuals on the board send you lists and you compile it
We'll
on
compile
the
it.
district.
We'll compile it here. Yeah.
So, but, yeah. So you're gonna need the name, you're gonna need the email address.
I just need, I think a name is good enough because it'll be on the Google form.
Okay.
I don't want to be storing email addresses for everybody in the world.
Okay.
I think that'll work.
Well, the
I've seen the
email-
nods from
The email,
people.
you'll have the emails from anybody who responds to
Right.
the invitation.
Right, on the invitation, if they say they want to come.
But to
So I think
send
it's-
out the invitation, you need the emails, right?
Well, I thought people would send it, it's more personable if
I see.
Yeah, they're not gonna
Okay.
come from Bill.
So-
I was just asking about
I
it.
was confused, I don't know if anyone else is.
Okay,
Yeah, I was
now
just-
I get it. So
We're sending them out.
people, you're gonna get an email from Bill, the language,
this template.
and you all are gonna send it out, and you're gonna let Bill know who's getting those.
Grant wants to know, do we send you everybody's that we sent it to's name, or do you care?
I just want the names of the folks that you sent it out to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just send me a list of the names.
Okay.
That's it. You said, because it'll be a lot more personal if you ask than if
Yep.
it comes from me.
Okay.
And then,
And
there's,
some guidelines for emails. This is not a group email. This is not pick 5 of your friends, put them all in the header. And
Right,
send,
it should
right?
be-
This
it
is
should be
an individual
addressed
email.
email.
Each
It could
person.
be
Okay.
CC'd.
You could be CC'd. Right. So some email logistics that
and
can
add
go
a
wrong.
sentence asking how people are doing. So, or whatever,
Okay.
no.
Yeah. The more that you reach out, it'll be personal, the better it's gonna, the better response.
Okay.
And I also just want to clarify, Bill, that in addition to this group doing that, the rest of the board will be invited.
Yeah,
And
and-
folks in the district are also going to be
Right,
invited.
I'm gonna invite the leadership team to that, and I'm gonna invite, some other folks that have been leaders within our staff
So it's
to do
not all
that.
on.
And especially with the students, I've already talked to a few of our staff members who are leaders with students. Our social justice leaders, our LG, my brain, this is my auditory dyslexia. LGBTQ plus leaders for those, and our GSA leaders, their faculty leaders to work with students. Like that.
Thank you.
I think we're at that point.
I think so too.
Oh, is it really?
Oh yeah.
6:30.
6:30.
Oh, no. Oh, that's so precious. And I'm on TV. Oh, it's so bad.
It happens.
Okay. We made it through the timeline?
We didn't do the timeline, but I think we
Okay.
kind of talked about that we're gonna wait.
We talked
Let's get
about
something back.
September through October.
Right, I think around in October, we'll have to come back and we can tell that, you can
Yep.
tell that to the board next week. and-
Okay, and they were pretty understanding last time we told it was pushed out.
Yeah.
The justification, so that should be fine.
I gotta go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think we've got through everything that we were gonna discuss with, Creative Historic Group. We're putting off the formal timeline adjustments. And so unless there's anything else, we are adjourned at 6:30.